Thank you for inviting me to speak today, and you'll be meeting Jeanette, who's my coworker, shortly. We are broadcasting. I'll show you pictures of where we're broadcasting from. Houston Audubon's Raptor and Education Center, which is about 2 miles from Hobby Airport, and we hope that when this whole COVID-19 thing calms down, that you guys will be able to take a field trip and visit us over here. We do a lot of school programs, outreach programs to schools with the birds that you're going to meet today. We do virtual programs, all ages. We have a special program designed for elderly folks, seniors in memory care facilities, so senior citizens who are suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's. So every day is different, and we talk to all kinds of people. We do a lot of family programming, and I'm just happy to be here today to support the Woods Project and talk to you about my favorite subject, which happened to be owls. This is Percy. Percy is an eastern screech owl. He's 13 years old. He was found in Bear Creek Park here in Houston when he was only about 5 weeks old. He was full grown. Birds grow really, really fast. So he was full grown. He was what we would call a fledgling. He had already left the nest, but he was still a young owl. And he was illegally shot with a pellet gun and sustained permanent damage to his left wing and his left eye. So you might notice when he turns his head that his eyes do not look the same. He had to have a partial amputation of his left wing, and he does not see out of his left eye very well. So he's what we refer to as non-releasable. All the birds we're going to talk about today are protected by both federal and state laws. That law originally went into existence over 100 years ago in 1918. It didn't originally protect owls, and we'll talk about that during the program, but they are fully protected by the law now. So in our country and in many other countries, you're not allowed to have owls as pets. They don't make good pets at all. These are wild creatures. You're going to meet an owl today that was raised in captivity by humans, and you probably be able to see why owls do not make very good pets. But we have special permits from the federal and state government to take care of the raptors and some of the other animals here at the center that we teach with, just like if you were to go to work for something like the Houston Zoo. They have to have special permits for their animal collection. And those laws, even though they were passed over 100 years ago, are critically important for the conservation status and survivability of many species of birds. Eastern screech owls like Percy are considered birds of least concern because they're very popular. There are large numbers of them. They have a good population. They're probably the most common owl in the Houston area. In just about any neighborhood you live in, area around town that you live in, you're going to have eastern screech owls in your neighborhood. They are nocturnal, active after dark, hunting for all kinds of small prey, from small mice, other birds, insects, lizards, spiders. They have a great variety of prey that they seek out after dark. Owls are raptors, birds of prey like eagles and hawks, so they capture their prey with their talons, their claws, and of course they have a hook-shaped beak for eating their prey. Being nocturnal and being predators, they're pretty good at camouflage, and we'll talk about that during the program also. But you can see that Percy's feather coloration and pattern would really help him blend in and camouflage during the daytime when he is trying to rest. And I'm going to play the call of the eastern screech owl a little bit later, and this might be a vocalization that you hear pretty frequently in your own neighborhood, and maybe you've wondered, hey, what is that sound? Because not all owls make a hooting call. They have a great variety of vocalizations that they use to defend their territories and communicate with their families and their mates. And I'll play a bunch of those calls during the presentation in just a few minutes. So this is, like I said, a bird that you can find right here in the Houston area. Even though we're in this huge city, a big, next to a big urban area, Texas has an amazing variety of bird life. And we're actually famous around the world for the diversity of birds that we have throughout the year. We're a top destination. So where I work for Houston Audubon is a bird conservation organization, and we actually protect 17 different sanctuaries on the upper Texas coast. So where I am at the Raptor Center, that's just one of our sanctuaries. We have a whole conservation team that helps to take care of and manage the habitats at our other sanctuaries. We have a great internship program for college interns. If you're interested in pursuing a conservation career, that would be something that you want to check out with Houston Audubon. So we have interns that live at our field station down on the coast, and they spend 6 to 8 months, sometimes longer, helping us with habitat restoration and conservation projects at our sanctuary. So we have a lot going on. We protect a lot of habitat, about 3,500 acres. And people come from all over the world to see the birds that you can see on our properties. Because of our location on the upper Texas coast, Houston, Galveston, surrounding areas, we get a tremendous number of migrant birds in the spring and in the fall. So a lot of folks travel from around the world to go bird watching here in the spring and the fall, because we are a huge rest stop, a destination for birds as they're traveling back and forth across the Western Hemisphere. And that's kind of one of my programs for a whole nother day, is just discussing migration and what birds go through. Many of the birds that we teach with are birds that were injured during their migration. Migration is incredibly dangerous, especially when you're talking about birds that are traveling from one end of the Western Hemisphere all the way to the other end. But we cannot live without birds. Scientists figured out that if all the birds disappeared, insects would destroy the planet Earth in 3 months' time. We need birds. They are a critical part of the food chain or the food web. And we're lucky to have such a great diversity of birds here in this area. And before we start talking about owls, Mr. Valdez had talked to me briefly. He's been studying dinosaurs lately, and of course there's a lot of great information, especially coming out recently in the last 2 decades or so, linking birds to dinosaurs. And a lot of scientists refer to birds as, you know, current dinosaurs that are on the land. And that whole controversy or desire to figure out the ancestry of birds really started back with Darwin's publication of The Origin of Species in 1859. And it was the following year, 2 years later, in 1861, that the very first fossilized feather was unearthed in Bavaria, I think. And this feather, if I show you an owl feather, what was interesting about this feather fossil that they found, it was a flight feather. You know, there was a lot of information about dinosaurs or beliefs that even if an animal had feathers, they weren't for flight. But this feather, one of the reasons why it was so important was, just like this is a left wing flight feather, it's asymmetrical, okay? The feather fossil that was found was also asymmetrical. And then that same year, of course, Archaeopteryx was found. And originally scientists thought that that was probably a feather from an animal like Archaeopteryx, but that's been proven to not be quite so true. With DNA research, research on the molecular level, scientists are now placing birds in or linked to a group of animals called theropods, and many scientists consider birds as kind of living dinosaurs. And in just the last few decades, scientists have been able to really dig deep into, on the molecular level, but from birds and animal or dinosaurs like T-Rex and others that were similar, and find all these similarities in their bone structure and tissue structure. So there's a lot of really interesting research being done right now. I guess a lot of fossils are being discovered in China, which is helping scientists to understand the connection between birds and dinosaurs. And there's a lot of momentum that birds are really kind of living dinosaurs, living theropod dinosaurs. So lots of cool stuff happening. And owls, which we're going to talk about today, have been around for millions of years, and we are very fortunate here in the Houston area to have a great variety of owl species that we can find even though we're in a big city. For the state of Texas, there are 17 different species. And I know that in your pack of material that you received, you've got some owl pellets, and we're going to talk about owl pellets in a few minutes and discuss those. Owls are an important part of the food web, like I said earlier, as top predators. And there's a great diversity of them around the world. When I first started studying owls, scientists believe there were about 140 species of owls. Well, just in the short 30 years or so that I've been learning about them, because of the advances in DNA research, they now believe there's over 220 species of owls around the world. So technology and the ability to really study animals on a very molecular level has really helped science know more than we ever knew before. So I'm going to share with you a PowerPoint. We're going to go kind of back and forth, share with you some interesting things about owls. So I call owls silent hunters, and we're going to discuss during the program why we refer to them as silent hunters. They are one of the few animals that can birds that can fly without making any noise, and we'll show you how that happens. As I mentioned, there are an amazing variety of owls around the world. You can find owls living across the planet Earth, everywhere except for Antarctica. They occupy just about every habitat on the planet except for Antarctica. Here in Texas, doesn't matter if you're in the piney woods of the Big Thicket or on Galveston Island, the hill country, Big Bend, desert regions, tropical regions in South Texas, in the valley, there are owls around. And this is where I'm broadcasting from. This is the front yard of Houston Audubon's Raptor and Education Center. So I'm just behind the glass in that little log cabin there. And this is where the owls reside that you're going to meet today. We are situated on a historic part of Sims Bayou. Bayou is just a Native American word that means small stream. And our section of Sims Bayou is the historic, the original Sims, not the big concreted one that you see if you're driving towards Hobby Airport or in some of the more downtown areas. So it's very lush with vegetation on either side. We're surrounded by park space, green space, and the new Houston Botanic Garden is right across the bayou from us. And even though we're a small location, we're only 1.5 acres, there's a lot of habitat surrounding us. So we can see all kinds of birds, including wild owls like this one that live in our forest, ducks like wood ducks, all kinds of egrets and herons. Along the bayou, there's a nesting pair of bald eagles about 10 minutes away from the center that we love to see. So even though we're 1.5 acres, our bird list of birds that have been recorded on our property is about 106 or 107 species. And that's a big conservation effort that anybody can get involved in, is logging, identifying birds, keeping track of the birds that you're seeing in a particular location, because that helps the top ornithologists in the world really get a handle on bird populations and changing movements of birds with this era of climate change and habitat loss. So even though we're tiny, we keep a pretty active bird list here on our property, as we do on all of our properties. And that's something that anybody can help with, just monitoring birds in your own backyard or at a city park. So we're going to focus on owls today, which are my favorite birds. And when we think about owls, we often think about an animal that's active after dark, nocturnal, but over half of the world's owls are actually active during the daytime also, diurnal, and some of them are crepuscular, meaning they're active in the early morning and then active again in the late afternoon. So not all owls are strictly nocturnal, but because of the nocturnal habits of many owls, they have really been maligned and misinterpreted for hundreds of years. And as I mentioned earlier, that conservation law that went into effect in 1918 did not protect owls because owls were basically on the bad list of birds. Up until the early 1970s, you could actually get paid by your local game warden to deliver a dead owl to their office because people believed they were pests. They would harm or injure farm animals. They weren't any good. So owls went through some pretty tough times, as did other raptors, the hawks, the eagles, the falcons. It took a long time for people to appreciate the role of a predator in a food web. And if you think about, if you grew up in the 1700s, 1800s, you're a farmer or just trying to survive off the land, you know, you guys go out on these great camping trips and you learn survival techniques. Having predators around may not be what you want. And so as a predatory bird, these birds were on the list of bad animals, and people worked for years and years and years to rid our land of foxes and coyotes and wolves, owls and hawks. They were mercilessly persecuted. And luckily, they finally were put on that list of protected birds in the 1970s, before it was too late. And now we understand, as you'll see, their important role in the food web. Another popular belief about owls is that they are wise. Rice University, of course, has an owl as its mascot. And that whole idea started in ancient Greece with this owl called the little owl. The little owl does not live here in Texas. It's a Middle Eastern owl, and it lived and lives in and around the Acropolis, the buildings that were originally built, the temples for the ancient Greek gods and goddesses. And it was the goddess of wisdom, Athena's mascot. Just like many of you might go to a school that has a mascot. This was her mascot, this little owl. It is a cousin to our burrowing owl. If you've ever been out further west in the hill country and seen burrowing owls, they're the owls that live in nest in underground burrows left behind by prairie dogs. Well, this was her emblem, her mascot, and she was a very important goddess in ancient Greek life. She was also the goddess of war. Her coins that always had her image of herself and her owl on it were the only coins that couldn't be bartered for in Greek history. They couldn't devalue them. And after the Romans conquered Greece, they adopted the owl as the symbol for their goddess of wisdom, whose name was Minerva. So since ancient times, owls have been associated with wisdom. And certainly in today's world, a lot of schools at all different levels like to have an owl as their mascot. And I think one of the reasons why we really like owls nowadays, in addition to books like Harry Potter that really helped to launch them into popularity, owls have these forward-facing eyes and very human-like expressions, whether they're sleeping, wide awake, smiling, yawning. They look like they have human expressions. And this one's off to a meeting at the office. So they're very endearing. And of course, nowadays we know how incredibly beneficial they are to the environment. And as I mentioned earlier, they come in a great variety of sizes, colorations, living in all kinds of habitats. Just like if you think of other top predators like cats, you know, there are cats that are as big like lions and tigers, and then smaller cats like ocelots and bobcats. Having a variety of sizes enables that, you know, group of animals to hunt for a variety of prey, and owls are no different. So they come in a great variety of sizes, as you'll see, hunting all kinds of prey. And a lot of us think about owls as being important for controlling populations of mice and rats, but they eat a tremendous number of other mammals, including skunks and rabbits, all kinds of reptiles, lizards and snakes, amphibians, other birds, all kinds of invertebrates, insects and spiders. So they have a great variety of prey items that they can go hunting for, depending on the species of owl and depending on the habitat where they live. And as birds, they have the highest metabolic rates, birds do, on the planet. So and they are warm-blooded creatures. They get their energy from food, just like mammals do, and they have a high demand for food. So they have big appetites, like this little guy. This is a burrowing owl swallowing a frog. And they also like a few snacks every now and then. And here's a young burrowing owl probably practicing his hunting techniques on this very small spider. So owls are top predators. And one of the most worldwide distributed owls is the barn owl, and one of the most recognized owls in the world, the barn owl. And also, this is an owl that was persecuted for many, many years, believed to be a symbol of bad luck. People believe that if you heard an owl or saw an owl, you know, you would be cursed, somebody in your family would die. And these were myths and folktales from around the world. They weren't just located in one area. And as Europeans came here, they spread these folktales and beliefs that, you know, owls were a symbol of bad luck, and farmers would actually kill owls on purpose and nail their bodies up to the side of a barn to ward off evil. Whereas what they didn't realize was the barn owl is the friend of the farmer. The barn owl, being a mouse eating expert, is going to do a much better job of mouse control on your farm than anything else. But again, people didn't understand that. So in the old days, they would get rid of the owl. And of course, the mouse or rat population would explode. And a lot of these rodents that were brought over by Europeans started spreading diseases, not only amongst their own kind, but also to people. As you take away the predators, not just the owls, but the foxes, the coyotes, all kinds of other predators, hawks and eagles and things, the mouse or rodent population starts expanding. And their population is just going to keep growing and growing unchecked, you know, until they get to the point where they're running out of resources. And so you end up having disease and starvation enter into that population. And because these animals are mammals, they started spreading diseases to people. In fact, our headquarters sanctuary in Houston, which is on the west side of Houston, it's called the Edith L. Moore Nature Sanctuary. It's named after the woman who built the house on the property, her log cabin. Edith Moore built her home there in 1930, 1931. And she actually came to Houston as a young girl, early 1900s, as a bacteriologist to study the diseases that mice were transferring to people. Again, this was a huge problem because people didn't get this connection with predators being, you know, the top and best control for populations of rodents. We need a balance between predator and prey to have a healthy environment. And in the example of the barn owl, one barn owl, which only weighs 1 pound, you're going to meet one in a few minutes, one barn owl over the course of 10 years will eat about 13,000 mice. Well, if you take the owl away, those 13,000 mice are going to eat about 150 tons of food. But of course, you guys know that those 13,000 mice are not going to stay 13,000. They're going to multiply greatly over the course of those 10 years. So we need our predators around to help us out. So how do we figure out what they eat? Well, that's one of the things you're going to do a little bit later, if you haven't already done it. Scientists dissect owl pellets. And owls are not the only birds that spit out pellets. All the raptors do: hawks, falcons, eagles, crows, blue jays, shrikes, shorebirds. A lot of birds will spit out pellets, and a pellet is just the undigestible leftovers from what they had, you know, eaten before. In this picture, you see a barred owl. The barred owl has captured its prey in its talons, but it can't eat that prey yet because it's got to spit out the pellet from what it ate the night before, the day before. And again, the pellet is just the leftovers that's all crushed and combined together in a special part of their stomach. And they have to spit that out because it's basically blocking their digestive tract. Owls really like to hunt for prey that they can swallow whole, that they can swallow quickly, so they can either quickly take something back to their nest to feed their young, or swallow their prey whole and then fly off and get away from any possible danger. But they've got to be able to spit out their pellets. So if they swallow their prey whole, as in this illustration, it goes into a part of their stomach called the proventriculus, where the normal digestive juices start to act on that mouse in this case. They cannot digest the fur and the bones, so that all gets squished into another part of their digestive system called the ventriculus, also known as the gizzard. And all of the fur, the bones, exoskeletons, whatever they've eaten, feathers, if they ate a bird that they can't digest, is compacted together. And then about 8 to 12 hours later, they spit that out. And by taking apart owl pellets, we get a little glimpse into their very secretive world. Owls are not the easiest birds to study because they do tend to be very secretive, and especially the ones that are active at night. They aren't very noisy birds. So finding and dissecting owl pellets has helped scientists understand what they need in order to survive. And it helps us as conservationists know what a habitat has to support, what the prey needs are in order to have owls around. And in one owl pellet, you can find lots of skeletons, especially if they're eating small prey. So in the pellets that you guys have, you might find several skulls in one pellet. And that's because the owl was eating small prey and multiple times the night before. If the owl caught some larger prey, you might only find a partial skeleton in that pellet. But it gives us a really good look into the secretive world of owls. So I want you to watch this short video of barn owls, and just pay attention to the adult that brings in the rat, and watch how quickly one of the little owlets consumes it. So he's delivered the prey to the one in the back, but this little guy in front steals it from his brother or sister. It's almost as big as he is, but he's going to swallow it almost completely. Mom or dad is like, what? And they've got to go back out hunting again. So imagine if, one barn owl eats 13,000 mice in 1 year. If you've got a whole family, how much mice control you're getting. Barn owls are in a completely separate family of owls. They have heart-shaped faces. They have a couple other things different about them, but built for being the top mouse catchers on the planet Earth. And we'll talk about more about them in a few minutes. So around the world, the smallest owl is the elf owl, which looks like the illustration there and fits in the palm of my hand. They happen to live right here in Texas. In the summertime, they go to Mexico for the winter. Female owls are larger than males, and a large female elf owl only weighs 1.5 ounces. So that's like the weight of a letter that you get in the mail. So this is a very, very tiny bird. Again, can fit in the palm of your hand. If you go out to West Texas, Big Bend area, or down to the valley, that's a great place to see elf owls in the summertime. They are cavity nesters. One of the characteristics that I think makes owls very smart is that they don't have to build their own nest. They recycle or reuse what's available to them in the environment. And an elf owl will reuse an old woodpecker hole, as you can see in this big saguaro cactus over here, or in this telephone pole. So a ladderback woodpecker has excavated out that tree cavity and used it as its own nest, but it's moved on, and that tree cavity, that hole in that tree, has now become available for a bird like an elf owl. So they rely on finding left behind nests of other birds. And I'll show you some more examples of that in a moment. But elf owls, being super tiny, they have a high-pitched vocalization that sounds like this. Kind of like they're laughing. They also make this sound. And it sounds like a horse. So not all owls make a hooting call, especially these little owls. The largest owl in the world, or one of the largest, is the Eurasian Eagle Owl. With a name like Eurasian Eagle Owl, you know, that doesn't belong here in the Western Hemisphere. It's a bird of North Africa, Europe, Asia, Russia. Another really big owl is an endangered species is the Blakiston's fish owl, which actually walks into rivers to catch fish and is very endangered due to deforestation and logging in its habitat. Here in the Western Hemisphere, the largest owl in terms of sheer weight in North America is the snowy owl. Snowy owls are really amazing birds. Snowy owls spend the summers up by the North Pole on a habitat called the Arctic Tundra. And the Arctic Tundra has no trees, so they nest on the ground. They just kind of squish down the grass to create a nest, to scrape on the ground. And in the summer, on the tundra, way up north by the North Pole, the sun never sets. For 3 months, the sun remains above the horizon, so it never gets dark. So these are birds that hunt day and night for small rodents called lemmings, ducks, shorebirds. There's a great variety of birds that call the Arctic tundra their summer home, and a lot of those birds pass by Houston on their way south every year, which is really cool that we have this connection to this faraway land that's very different from what we have here in Houston. So the snowy owls go up there for the summer to nest, and in the winter, of course, it is very much colder and very dark for a long period of time, so they are one of the species of owls that are migratory. And the older males will stay as close as possible to their Arctic homeland in the winter, but the females and the juveniles will move further south. And every now and then, every 3 or 4 years, a few snowy owls will visit us here in Texas. And the bird watchers go crazy and drive all over to see the snowy owls because it's a pretty rare sight. But if you were to go to New York, New Jersey, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania in the winter, you can probably see lots of snowy owls spending the winter in their on their wintering grounds, and then again making that dangerous journey back up north to the Arctic for the summer. But they're making use of a habitat where there's few people, lots of resources, just like all the other birds that go up there do. Being a large bird, they have a deep voice, and this is what a snowy owl sounds like. It's not very exciting. That's the sound that they make. And snowy owls are a little bit unusual in that you can tell the difference between the males and the females by the color and pattern of their feathers. The females and juveniles have spots all over their feathers to help them camouflage. The males are smaller, and as the males get older and older, they lose those spots and become pure white. So if you ever visit a center, a zoo maybe, that has snowy owls, you'll be able to tell the difference between the males and females pretty easily, not only by size, but by pattern also. Most other owls, their feather pattern and coloration is going to be pretty similar between males and females. So owls, again, are recyclers, either using a tree cavity left behind by a woodpecker, just using the ground as their nest in the case of snowy owls, reusing old hawk or eagle nests when those birds aren't around, burrowing owls using burrows left behind by birds like animals like prairie dogs. And luckily for many species, they'll also use man-made boxes like barred owls and screech owls, barn owls. They'll readily use man-made nest boxes. So that's another way that we can help them and their populations, in this time when they're losing habitat, on a daily basis. Here are some natural nesting sites. There's a burrowing owl in front of its prairie dog burrow, and a baby barred owl in a tree that has a naturally formed cavity, probably from a branch falling off a tree, maybe during a storm or as the tree is naturally aging. So I mentioned earlier that owls are top predators, so they've got to have some incredible characteristics that help them to be top predators. And when you meet the owls in a few minutes, you'll see that they have a great diversity of eye coloration. Irises can be bright yellow, orange, dark brown, pale yellow. And all owls have huge eyes. And those eyes are filled with rod cells and cone cells, just like yours are. So you have the same cells in your eyes. Rod cells help you to see in dim light. Cone cells help you to see color. We have more cone cells, although owls can see color really well. We have more cone cells than they do. They have way more rod cells. So they have incredible vision in dim light. Excellent, excellent night vision. And their eyes stare straight ahead. They have binocular vision just like we do. Binocular vision doesn't mean you have binoculars on your head. It means you're using both eyes, bi for two, at the same time, which gives you really good depth perception. You would not want to play baseball with one eye shut. Your brain would have a really hard time hitting a ball or catching a ball. You want to use both eyes to pinpoint the location of an object. And we have muscles around our eyes, so we can move our eyes all around, back and forth. And we also have a pretty wide field of view and very good peripheral vision. But owls don't have as wide a field of view, so they can't see very well on the side like we can, and they can't move their eyes. Their eyeballs are held in place by this ring of bone called the sclerotic ring. And so in order for them to see what's going on around them, they have to turn their head. We have 7 bones in our neck. Owls have 14, and they can turn their head 3/4 of the way around in both directions. So we can go from one side to the other, 180, but owls can do 270 degrees rotation. And that's important as a predator. You don't want to make a whole lot of noise if you're looking around, looking out for prey or watching out for danger. Being able to spin your head silently is really important because everybody's on high alert, especially after dark. You'll also notice that when the owls blink, they have a third eyelid. All birds have a third eyelid called the nictitating membrane, and it's see-through, or sometimes it has kind of a bluish tint to it. And all birds have this third eyelid. It comes from the center over inside and then out. And it protects their eyes when they're flying from getting dried out, getting dust particles in their eyes. When an owl is swooping down to catch their prey, they'll close that third eyelid to protect their eyes from sticks or grass or anything that might poke them in the eye, because again, their eyeballs are really big. So they have an upper eyelid like we do, they have a lower eyelid, and then they have this third nictitating membrane. And like people, and unlike many other birds, when owls rest, they close their upper eyelid. When most other birds are resting, they actually raise their lower eyelid, which is kind of weird. But I think, again, why owls have such a human-looking face, actually close their upper eyelid when they're resting. The other claim to fame that owls have is their hearing. All birds have incredible hearing, and owls are top on the list of their ability to hear their prey very, very far away. An owl can hear a mouse a football field away. They can hear their prey under snow, under grass. And scientists have made this slightly confusing for people because they call some owls, like this one in the top left, the long-eared owl, and this one next to it, the short-eared owl. So I know when I was growing up, I thought those feathers on the top of their head were ears. But those feathers have nothing to do with their hearing. Those are ear tufts or feather tufts that enable owls to camouflage and hide and blend in. Their ears are behind their eyes, just like where yours and mine are, covered up by that disc of feathers that you'll see on the next owl that we're going to meet. And their ear holes, because they don't have an external part to their ear like we do, they can't wear earrings. This part of our ear captures sounds and directs the sounds back to their ear hole, our ear holes. Birds don't have this external part, so owls use the feathers on their face like a satellite dish to capture the sounds and direct the sounds back to their ear openings. And these ear openings, again, not those darn their ears, these ear openings are asymmetrical. So one opening is up higher, one opening is larger, and owls can hear the fraction of a second time difference that sounds are reaching their ears. So you'll know, if you watch owl videos, you'll see them moving their head back and forth quite a bit. they're doing something called triangulation. They're moving their head until the sound that they're listening to hits both ears at the same time. So forming a little triangle with their subject. And when that happens, they will know exactly where that animal is without ever seeing it. So they can hunt in complete darkness. Many species of owls can stay up north in the wintertime because they can hear their prey under snow, whereas other predators like hawks that rely on their eyesight have to make that journey south in the winter because they can't find their prey. Migration is a dangerous option. It's also dangerous to stay up north and having to survive winter and storms, climate change, things like that. But owls with their incredible hearing can find their prey when other animals cannot. So asymmetrical ear openings, big facial disc of feathers, enabling the owls to use their hearing. Feathers, of course, are the hallmark of all birds, and feathers help owls in camouflage. It's a little tricky, but you might be able to see the young great horned owls on this cliff right here, but obviously well camouflaged during the nesting period. This is a barred owl. Again, blending perfectly in with the trunk of this tree so it can rest during the day and not be bothered by anybody. Owls have very fluffy, large feathers so that when they're flying, they don't have to flap a lot. They're very buoyant in the air, but they can also use those big feathers to poof out and look bigger than they actually are to scare away predators or photographers. Their feathers are excellent for insulating them and, again, enabling many species to stay up north rather than make a dangerous migration journey. The feathers on their face, important for catching sounds and directing the sounds back to their ear openings. This is a great example. If you look very carefully, you might be able to see the owl in this photograph, perfectly camouflaged. One of the reasons why we do our owl programs in the evening, in the winter, it's much easier to find owls in the winter when they're actively securing their territories and at night when they're vocalizing, because it's really hard to see them during the day because they can camouflage so well. It's easier to find them by hearing them vocalize than actually seeing them with your eye. And that's where that little screech owl is, right there. Another very important characteristic that owls share is that they are silent flyers, silent hunters as we call them. Owls have specialized edges on the leading edge of their flight feathers, where the barbs and the barbules, instead of hooking together like normal feathers, the barbs and barbules don't hook together on the edge, the leading edge, and we call that the fimbriae. And that edge that looks like a comb basically muffles the sound of the air as they're flying, so they fly without making any sound. And that's important if they're using their ears to tune into their prey, and they don't want the prey to hear them coming, so they have this ability to fly silently. Great characteristic that owls share. So again, the barbs and the barbules aren't sticking together, forming a solid surface. This comb-like edge enables them to fly quietly. And as birds of prey, they have talons to capture their prey and a sharp hooked beak for eating. And we're going to meet 3 more owls. You met the screech owl. There are 17 different species in Texas. The first one we're going to meet, or the next one we're going to meet, is the barred owl. And barred owls make a very famous call. Move this over here. Barred owls can be found in areas where there's water, lakes and rivers, old growth forests. And they say when they're calling, it sounds like they're saying, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for y'all?" So if you've ever been camping at Brazos Bend State Park, you've probably heard that call. If you get a couple barred owls together and they have a party, this is what it sounds like. So that's the barred owl. The great horned owl is the what people refer to as the hoot owl. Again, found across our area in more open park areas, green spaces. The great horned owl has a hooting call. The males hoot 5 times, and it sounds like they're saying, "Who's awake? Me too. Hoo, 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 hoo." The female owls have more to say, so they add extra hoots. So in this recording, you'll hear a female and then a male answering. And these vocalizations are really important for territorial control. Most owls mate for life, so it establishes that pair bond, even if they've been separated during a time period during the year. And of course, communicating with their family. So this is the call of the great horned owl. So the female was first, and then the male answered with, "Who's awake? Me too." So if you ever hear a typical hooting call, it's probably a great horned owl. You met Percy, the eastern screech owl, and screech owls don't screech. They make a sound, a vocalization that sounds like a horse. I'll play this one first. This is their whinny call. And then their other call is a trill. So they make this very famous trill call on one note. If you've ever been walking around after dark and you hear kind of an eerie trill, in your yard or in your neighbor's yard, it's an eastern screech owl. And they come in 2 different colorations. They come in the gray color morph, like you saw with Percy, and this cinnamon red. The gray is the more dominant coloration because it does a much better job of camouflaging, but we do have plenty of this cinnamon red rufous morph in our area also. So that's the screech owl. And this is the barn owl. We'll also meet a barn owl in a minute. Barn owls are found across the world except for the polar region, so they're one of the most recognized owls in the world. And they're in a separate family of owls compared to all the other ones. They have a heart-shaped face. One of their talons has a little groove on it that helps them to comb the feathers on their face. They have very long, slender legs, which you'll see when you meet our barn owl today. And the reason why they're called barn owls is they're often found nesting in barns or abandoned buildings. They would have been a cavity nesting bird back in the old days. But as the forests were cleared, they had to, change. And of course, a barn is a perfect place to live if you are a specialist in hunting mice. So they are a true friend to the farmer these days with their ability to hunt for mice in the agricultural fields and in the barns. But again, in the old days, these birds were heavily persecuted and believed to be ghosts and witches. And you can kind of understand that when you hear the call of the barn owl. The males are pure white underneath. So if you use your imagination and think of yourself living in the old days before there was electricity, and you go out to the barn to check on your chickens and your pigs and your cows, and something white rushes past you but doesn't make any sound, and then you hear this, a blood-curdling scream, you can understand why people were scared back in the old days of these birds and made up all kinds of stories that they were really witches and ghosts. That's the sound that they make. But of course, we now know that they're incredibly beneficial to have around. And we don't have a lot of barn owls right in the Houston area, but if you go out to the coastal marsh areas, Katy Prairie, that's a great place to hopefully see some barn owls. So we are going to meet some owls now. Whoops. I can get my PowerPoint moving. And there you go. Okay. We're going to meet some owls and see them up close and personal. I'm going to go get our next owl, which you'll probably recognize now that's shown them to you. Jeanette is over here too. Say hi, Jeanette. Hello. She's going to be helping me, passing me some owls today in our tiny studio. Thank you. All right, this is Juliet. This is a barred owl, and they're called barred owls because of the stripes, both horizontal and vertical, on their feathers. She is the same age as Percy the Screech owl, about 13 years old. She was found when she was only 5 weeks old by some folks hiking along the Brazos River. They saw her parents, around in the forest in the trees, and then discovered her on the ground with a badly broken right wing. And so she was rescued and sent to a bird rehabilitation center, and they think that she fell from her tree nest during a bad storm that had occurred in the area about a week before, because the wound was old, the bones were sticking out. Birds have hollow bones. The larger bones are hollowed to enable flight, and oftentimes when they break, they end up breaking into very small pieces or splintering. So they were unable to save her right wing, and they had to amputate it. So obviously she can't fly with just one wing. So she lives here at the center. Barred owls can be found in old growth forests. Like I mentioned, Brazos Bend State Park is a perfect habitat for barred owls because of all the water that they have. They love to hunt for crawfish, fish, frogs, snakes, mice, sometimes smaller birds. And they are cavity nesting owls, but they need large old growth trees that have really large cavities in them. So they're a little bit more what we would call a habitat specialist compared to a lot of other owls. They do use nest boxes, so that if you have a good habitat, forested area where you can put up a nest box for a barred owl, that would be a great way to attract them to your property. Well, I want to show you something really cool with Juliet. You can see she's got a very round face, and that disc of feathers is what an owl uses to capture the sounds and direct the sounds back to their ear openings. So I'm going to show you what her ear looks like. And I have to hold her in a special way to do that. It always looks weird, but she just likes to complain about it. And I'll show you, this is a big bird. She only weighs about 1 pound, but you can see how large her wings are and her tail. You would think that they weigh a lot more than that, but again, birds have hollow bones to keep them lightweight for flight. So she's also a talker. Let me show you where their ears are. Remember, behind their eyes, behind this disc of feathers, is their ear opening. And I'm just going to peel the feathers apart. And you can see she's got that huge ear hole on the side of her head. I think we'll do that now next. Huge opening that goes pretty much the whole side of her skull. Her skull is only as big as like a ping pong ball. But her feathers, of course, stand straight up, so it's deceiving. It looks like she has, or she would have, a much bigger head than she actually does. Dark brown eyes, and Juliet actually has a cataract, I don't know if you guys can see, on one of her eyes, her left eye. That cataracts are something that can happen to a bird in the wild and be an early cause of death. Juliet doesn't have to worry about going hunting. She eats 2 adult mice every night for dinner that we supply for her. Percy, the little screech owl, eats 1 whole adult mouse every single night. Remember, birds are warm-blooded vertebrate creatures, so they have a high demand for food. Here at the center, we also teach with some snakes, and we have a 6-foot corn snake that eats 1 mouse once a week, compared to this bird, that eats 2 mice every single day. So big difference between cold-blooded and warm-blooded creatures. So the next time you're out, maybe in Brazos Bend area or along Buffalo Bayou here in the Houston area, where there's a lot of trees, you can also find barred owls. Our headquarters sanctuary on the west side of Houston has barred owls that live there, wild on the property. We have a creek that runs through the property. And Jeanette, can you turn off my virtual paper, because Alex is disappearing. Alex disappears with the virtual. Here we go, stand by, Thank you. This is Alex. Alex is a barn owl. She is 17 years old, and she and her brother Getty live here at the center. They came to us from a zoo in Louisiana. This is a bird that was raised in captivity at the Cincinnati Zoo, bred by the zookeepers. Her parents are there at the zoo. Bred to go to another zoo in Chicago to be used for educational programs. So she and her brother have spent their whole life in captivity and cannot go back to living in the wild because of that. I'm going to get her to hopefully stand up. Alex has unfortunately developed cataracts in both of her eyes, and so her vision is not great either, but she's got a lot of spunk for a 17-year-old owl. And you might be wondering how long owls live. An owl like a barn owl can live, 30, 35 years in captivity. Their lifespan in the wild is a lot shorter because of all the dangers that they face. But I'm going to come over here so you guys can see, hopefully. She's got huge feet. So birds walk on their toes. They have 4 toes, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, and owls have a reversible toe that can go both ways. But she's standing on her toes, and her ankle, so think about where your ankle is, her ankle is way up high. Okay, so this whole structure is her foot. And then, of course, her knee is up higher, and her hip is way up high. So this bird is built for catching prey in thick grass and vegetation. Barn owls specialize in hunting over prairies, marshes, farm fields. They fly low over the vegetation and with their face facing down to use that facial disc to capture the sounds, to direct the sounds back to their ear openings. They can find their prey without ever seeing it. They've done all kinds of tests on barn owls. They can capture prey, locate their prey in complete darkness, which very few animals can do, just by hearing alone. Again, they have the specialized edge on the leading flight feathers. So when they're flying, they fly without making any sound. And they just spend, the early evenings or early mornings before the sun comes up, flying back and forth over a field, head pointed down, and able to capture and consume many, many mice over the course of one evening. So extremely beneficial. This is a bird whose numbers are sadly going down in many parts of our country because there's fewer and fewer old barns or sheds or buildings for them to nest. So there's a big conservation push to put up artificial nest boxes for these birds in their proper habitat. And I remember after Hurricane Ike, which was about 2008, barn owls had lost their nest sites on the Bolivar Peninsula, on Galveston Island. So a whole team of volunteers got together because all those buildings had been knocked down to build artificial nest boxes and put them up on poles on the Upper Texas coast to provide potential nest sites for these birds. There's a really neat story about a guy out in Colorado who's helping farmers build artificial nest boxes to put on the sides of their barns, because nowadays a lot of farmers don't want to have, openings in their barn to allow potential other things to come in. So having a nest box on the side is really beneficial. So there are ways to help these birds out. We're going to meet one more owl. And again, I'm really happy that you guys will get a chance to dissect some pellets later. These birds spit out pellets every day, but we know what's in them because we know what we're feeding them, mice and rats. But being able to dissect a pellet from a wild owl is really amazing because it's like a Christmas present. You don't know what's on the inside, and it'll help you understand the impact that these birds can make in the environment. So our last bird, her name is Simon. She's a female great horned owl with a boy's name, and she's only 3 years old. In captivity, great horned owls can live to be almost 40 years old. She was found alongside of a highway in Wyoming about 24 hours after she had been hit by a car. She had a broken leg and a broken wing. Getting hit by a car is a big problem for owls, especially ones that live here in our city. That's a leading cause of death. Eating poison, like from rat poison or mouse poison that people put out, is another really big problem for these birds. Getting caught by cats or other predators are more problems. Luckily for Simon, she was found alongside the highway and rescued. And she went to a rehab center where they did surgery on her wing and on her leg, and they both healed really well. But her wing healed slightly crooked. So when she flies lopsided, and she can't go back to living in the wild if she doesn't fly well enough. So she lives here with another one of our great horned owls who's 30 years old. And again, these birds can have a long life when they don't have to deal with the dangers that they would in the wild. Great horned owls like Simon, she weighs about 3 pounds. She can capture and kill animals that weigh 3 times what she weighs. Again, they capture their prey with these incredibly powerful talons. A great horned owl can exert well over 500 pounds of pressure per square inch. If I tried to squeeze your hand, I could only squeeze about 40 pounds of pressure, but a great horned owl can squeeze way over 500 pounds of pressure. And again, capturing and killing an animal that weighs 3 times what she weighs. She's a little over 3 pounds. So just imagine tackling somebody that weighs 3 times what you weigh. It's pretty impressive. They have huge yellow eyes. She's looking all around right now. And their eyes are extremely light sensitive. Remember, they're packed with those rod cells. And so their eyes change. The pupil dilates very, very quickly and changes in the amount of light. You might even be able to see it as she's moving her head around. So at night, you can't hardly see that yellow iris. Her pupil is wide open to gather all that light, send it back to those light sensitive rod cells. So their night vision is incredible. They're called horned owls because of the longer feathers that they can stand up on the top of their head that help them to hide and camouflage during the daytime when they're typically resting. And great horned owls are found in our area in the city of Houston, which might surprise some of you because this is such a huge bird. But they have figured out how to live in cities and suburbs. But again, that does bring them closer to danger, like getting hit by a car or eating rat poison, rodenticides, things like that. So that's some of their big problems. And an easy thing we can do to help out any of these birds is, number one, not use mouse or rat poison of any kind, and to not litter. You guys probably know we have a big littering problem here in the city of Houston. And when people litter along our streets and highways, that attracts small critters like mice and rats at night. And those small animals attract the predators, which end up sometimes getting hit by cars. So just keeping our roadways clean, not littering, is an immediate benefit we can have for these birds. Another one that you might think about maybe on a school campus or in your yard is keeping parts of dead trees available. This is a branch that came down during a storm, but it had a cavity that was excavated by a red-bellied woodpecker. This is a perfect example of a tree cavity for a screech owl. The woodpeckers need the dead trees to excavate. And so by keeping dead trees up or parts of dead trees, that'll give places for woodpeckers to nest, and in the future be a potential nest site for an owl like a screech owl. All of these birds are important. They play a key role in the food web, helping us control populations of these guys. It's my pretend rat. We need them around. They're protected, but again, they face a lot of dangers every day, especially when they live here in the big cities. So I hope you guys enjoyed meeting the owls, and I'm happy to answer any questions, or maybe I've told you too much stuff already and you're ready to go dissect your pellets. Michael, did you have any questions?
Oh, I have a lot of questions.
Oh, good.
Before I ask any questions, I wanted to open it up to some of our participants. If you have a question, you can go ahead and write it in the chat box, and I'll kind of just scroll down on in order. And I'll invite you to unmute yourself and you can ask your question. So actually, I'm going to start with Carlos. It seemed like you had a question a little bit ago. Carlos, if you want to unmute and you can ask your question.
Something's not okay. Hi, I was just wondering, because you were cut off on my end during the parts of the presentation. What was the owl that sounds like it's saying who?
That's the great horned owl. They have the typical hooting sound,
Mm-hmm.
And that would be the great horn. All the others have much more crazy sounds, but it's the great horn, the one you just saw.
Yeah, because at my house, here and there, I would hear an owl that sounds similar to what I heard.
Because there is a dove called a white-winged dove, which we have a lot of, that sounds almost exactly like an owl. So sometimes that can be confusing.
Yeah, but like it's mainly like at night that I hear it.
Hey, that's great. Then you have an owl. That's awesome. Very good.
Yeah.
Thanks, Carlos. Sonia, did you want to ask your question next?
Yeah, you might have said this, but I think I missed it. You said that the ear tufts aren't related to hearing. Do you have an idea of what they're actually for, or why they have?
Scientists think that some owls that have them use them to help them camouflage during the day, so the owls will get real tall and skinny when they're like, they can compress their feathers and stand next to a tree trunk, and they'll poke those feathers up and be able to camouflage a little bit better. They can also move them back and forth, so scientists think that they just like facial expressions can help owls communicate with one another. You know, if they lay them down and poof up, they're being defensive. If they're standing straight up tall, you know, maybe they're just trying to hide or not be bothered. So possibly communication, and certainly for camouflage. Good question.
That's really cute. Thank you.
John, did you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, I was wondering about the internship you were talking about.
So our interns are part of our conservation team, and we actually refer to them as technicians, but these are college students, obviously most of them interested in sciences, natural resources, and we usually get a couple new people several times every year, and we have housing down on the coast for them in our field station, and they provide an incredible benefit to us in terms of habitat restoration and just taking care of our coastal sanctuaries, because we don't have a staff place. We don't have an office down there. Well, we have an office, but you know, they're kind of our on the site folks for some of our coastal sanctuaries, especially in the spring when we get visited by thousands of people from around the world. So if you look on our website, you can find more information about the internships. So as you think about college and a career in natural resources, it would be a great place to start. That's for sure. A lot of it's a highly sought after position around the world. People put in their resumes from all over.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think Ireland might have a question for people maybe who aren't college aged.
Yeah, when at our age, if we're like really interested in learning more about the owls, and I know you said there's different programs for different ages, is there anything like that where, you know, high school students are
absolutely
kind of be more involved with the center?
So volunteers are our backbone, and we do have a volunteer program. We do a lot with high school students at a lot of our different sanctuaries. We have really fun work parties, we call them, here at the Raptor Center, at our headquarters in West Houston, at our coastal sanctuaries. If you love the beach, we have really fun events down, or work parties down on our coastal sanctuaries, cleaning up litter, helping to restore habitat, building fences, whatever. There's always something going on. So we have a volunteer coordinator who helps with all of that. Here in the education department, we are always looking for help for our summer camps that we hold both on the west side of town and down here by the Hobby Airport area. And just general volunteering in the summertime. So again, connect to us through our website, search for volunteer, and there's like a short form you can fill out, and then we have like volunteer training and find out what you're interested in. And we also do a lot of group projects. So if you guys, after the COVID thing calms down, want to have like a woods project group come and spend part of a day or a day at our coastal sanctuaries or the Raptor Center, we'd love to host a group of volunteers, and we'll give you a great tour and feed you, all that kind of fun stuff. And make you work really hard too.
Awesome. Alejandra?
Yeah. How many owls are like typically rescued at your organization, and what was one of like the hardest, or I guess what are like the typical injuries that those owls, or like that you typically see within those owls that you rescue?
So that's a great question, because we actually don't do the rescuing. We just do we're on the education side. But I did run a bird rescue for many, many years, and I got my start as a high school student volunteering at a bird rescue organization. We have two big rescue organizations in Houston, one at the Houston SPA for wildlife, and another one on the west side of Houston. And they, again, are typically seeing owls that are young owls that have fallen out of trees during bad storms like we recently had, owls that are illegally shot, a lot of owls that are hit by cars, owls that are poisoned, which is one of the saddest things you can see, you know, because mouse and rat poison is blood thinner, and it makes the animals, you know, bleed out. They can't control bleeding on the inside, and so when a predator eats that animal, it's going to get sick and be unable to hunt and feed, and that bird potentially can starve to death, or something else bad can happen to it. It's a terrible thing out there. But when a bird comes into a rescue center, that rescue center is also mandated by certain laws in our country, and they either have to fix that animal and release it, or if they can't help it, you know, sometimes they have to euthanize it if they can't help it at all. But if they can't help it so that it can go back into the wild, then it becomes available to go to an education center, which is what we have here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 owls that we teach with. One of them is retired. He's our 30-year-old great horned. If you come here, you can see all 7 of them. But these are all birds that have gone through rehab and can no longer go back to living in the wild. So they now will live out their life here at our center and help us out with education. So that's a great question.
Thank you for your time and showing us the whole presentation. It was very educational.
I wish you guys could be here in person.
Thanks. Miguel, did you have a question?
Yes, I was wondering, you were showing us like the bone structure or like their digestive system. And I was wondering, how does their jaw work? Because I've seen that some owls eat like large prey. Like, is there like a specific bone structure that allows them to expand, or how does their jaw work?
Let me see if I can show you on this. We have here at the center, we have a lot of specimens. If you guys go off to college and study biology at a big university, they will have a huge collection of what we call study skins. These are birds that were found dead and are now preserved, just like taxidermy. And we have a large collection here at the center if you come visit. And I think hopefully you'll be able to see this. So when you look at an owl, or really most birds, you're just seeing the very tip of the bird's beak. Turn around this way, because they've got all these feathers covering their face. But if I see if I can do this, it's tricky. You know, if you think about your jaw, so where our jaw bones are kind of meet in the back is way back here. This bird, the back of its beak is way back over here way back over here under its eye. So it can open up its beak really far. You're just seeing the very tip of its beak out here. So it, just like we can, it can open up its beak a great distance and swallow some large prey. So a barn owl like this can swallow a good sized rat. If it catches larger prey, it's going to have to rip it up. But again, you typically only see the very tip of a bird's beak, but the junction is way back behind its eye, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. Good question. But they don't expand like a snake, like a reptile can, has the elastic ability to expand its lower jaw and eat something really giant.
Guadalupe, did you want to go next?
Yes. My question is, have you ever encountered any challenges when it comes to working with owls?
Yes, they can be very, very dangerous to work with. I actually, we wear, as you saw, we wear heavy gloves when we're working with the owls. And the old great horned owl, who's now retired, he was my main teaching owl for 2 decades. And one night I had come home from a program, and for programs, when we travel, they travel in these very specially made boxes for birds. And I was getting them out of the box to take them back outside to put them away. These birds all live outdoors in big outdoor enclosures. And I was stepping backwards and I tripped and I started falling. And of course, he was sitting on me. The birds wear a special leash to keep them safe while they're out in public doing a program, because we don't want them to fall on the ground if they get scared, if there's a fire alarm or something like that. Anyway, when I stepped backwards, he clenched down and he went right through the glove and completely through my hand with his talons. And if you think about a bird, when they sleep at night, their tendons are the opposite to us. When they're clenched down, they're basically relaxed. There's no pressure, stress, or anything on them. And so when a raptor, a hawk, or an owl, captures its prey, it can hold that position for a long time. And remember how much pressure I told you about? There is no physical way for a human to separate, to pull apart a great horned owl when it's clenched down on its prey. I mean, it's impossible. I had a hawk go through my hand years ago when I was in high school, when I was learning how to work with birds, and 2 grown men couldn't separate it. You basically have to sit there crying in pain, waiting for that bird to let go. So I sat on the ground crying, waiting for that great horn to let go. And I had some nerve damage and tendon damage, but their defense is their feet. That's what they use to defend themselves. And wild owls can have very strong personalities. It takes a lot to get them comfortable with doing programs, and some owls will never tolerate it. So they are, truly wild creatures, and I give them full respect. That's a great question.
Okay.
And they're kind of messy to clean up too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess just to follow up with that real quick, are there owls that have particularly difficult temperaments, like like a certain species, like those are just really difficult to work with, we don't even
I have found I've been doing this for a long time, and I have found that individual owls have individual personalities. Like my old owl that I've been working with for 30 years, he is tough as nails. It's like starting all over every time we work with him. Whereas Simon was hit by a car, and possibly had some head trauma, and maybe that's why Simon is pretty chill, pretty relaxed owl. So it's not really species, it's really individual owl, and I think it's hard to some owls are just really laid back and some owls aren't. I guess I can put it that way. And there are certainly some species that become very tolerant of people and don't care. And you can get very close to them even in the wild. But when you're dealing with birds that have been injured, sometimes very traumatically, it's hard to really assess what's going on in their head and compare them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Let's see. I think Jesse had a question. Jesse, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I just had a quick question about if folks are interested in following your career path or working in an educational setting such as yours, what kind of classes should they take, or what majors should they follow in college? What's the path?
So I was real interested in veterinary medicine, but was thinking more zoology originally when I was in high school. Of course, this was a long time ago. And there's many more opportunities now, but I wasn't so much interested in captive zoo animals. I became real interested in when I was in high school because I ended up volunteering at a bird rehabilitation center. I fell in love with owls and the diversity of birds we have in our own country. So the program I went through, wildlife biology and forestry at Virginia Tech, is one of the top in the country. LSU has an incredible program. Of course, ornithology, which is the study of birds, Cornell University is the top university for that. Texas A&M has a great program. Jeanette, who's my co-worker, she got her wildlife degree at Stephen F. Austin, was a volunteer here for many years and now works here full time. So any of the sciences, but even biology, a biology degree with, trying to get as many ornithology, forestry related classes is the way to go, definitely. There's a lot of the world, you can incorporate birds into so many different career paths. I often talk to high school students, and let's say you're interested in technology. I mean, the fact that scientists now are able to design satellite transmitters to go on the tiniest of birds to track migration. So maybe you're more interested in that realm, computers and technology. People are needed in that area, and they'll be working with birds. I have a good friend who works for Harris County Public Health. They have a whole mosquito division. They go out and capture and put ID bracelets on bands every day of the week here in Harris County and draw blood from those birds. And birds aren't harmed. They're carefully caught in special nets. They take a blood sample, and that's how they track West Nile virus and St. Louis encephalitis around our city, and that's been going on for 50 years. So maybe you're interested in that kind of a path. Optics, binoculars, cameras, spotting scopes. There's a whole career path that can take you into that area. Retail, birding is the second biggest hobby in the US. If you go into Walmart or Target or Kroger's, there's a section of bird feed. There are big companies that are trying to make better bird feeders, better binoculars, better bird seed. So if you're into retail businesses, there's a whole retail world. Wild Birds Unlimited is a standalone retail shop catering just to birds and bird watching. So there's a lot of different career paths that you can incorporate an interest in the natural world into your career, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat function, but I was curious, how do the owls get along with each other in
So we only keep the same species in the same enclosure. So the great horned owls are together, the barn owls, screech owls are together. We don't mix species. If you visit the Raptor Center, the only birds where we can mix species are kites, which are a type of hawk. Kites are social birds. So if you visit us, you'll see that we have 2 different species of kites in the same enclosure. But other than that, in in captivity and in the wild, they keep to themselves, and there's like a hierarchy. So if you have great horned owls in an area, in a habitat, you're not going to have barred owls. If you have barred owls in an area, you're probably not going to have screech owls. They don't like to overlap very much, because owls will, if they can, hunt other owls, smaller species. It's not the norm, but it can happen. So they try to stay separate, and they rigorously protect their territory using their vocalizations and try to avoid any confrontations.
Cool. And you kind of touched on it. So owls will hunt other owls if possible. What other predators typically would go after an owl? And
really, other than people, they are top predators. The only time that typically that an owl really has to worry is when they're young, if they fall out of the nest. If they can't get back out of danger, then they're at risk from coyotes, bobcats, feral cats, dogs. So once they are flying and strong and hunting on their own, there's really not a lot of there aren't any other predators. They're resting during the day in this area when the hawks are out during the daytime. So it's really if they're injured or if they've fallen, if they're on the ground when they're young, that's when they're most at risk. And for a great horned owl, there's really nobody that messes with those birds at all.
Thank you. We want to make sure we talk about the binoculars a little bit. But I was curious, how often do they replace their feathers, or do they?
Well, like all birds, they molt at least once a year. A lot of birds will molt in the fall, right before winter comes. But for owls, it's kind of messy. And I'm going to ask, hold on just a second. Jeanette, are you there? In my office is a purple bag. If you could bring that to me, that'd be great. So owls kind of have like a long, drawn out molting process. Most of the owls right now are molting. But they do replace their feathers every single year, like most birds do. And so do you guys have, most of them you guys use binoculars before? Or do they have binoculars?
Everyone for the summer program that's in this video received a pair of binoculars.
Okay. So we do a brief tutorial when folks come here for classes, and just real quickly, because this can make a big difference. Obviously for binoculars, they're going to go in and out. That's because the distance between your eyes varies from person to person. When you look through binoculars, you should see one circle. If they're too far apart for your eyes, you're going to see two, and that's not going to be very beneficial. So in and out is important. Everybody is either right eye dominant or left eye dominant. And actually, before we get to that, I'll show you this. On a pair of binoculars, they have eye cups, and the eye cups can be up or down. So I just pulled these eye cups up. Sometimes they're flaps that you can flip up. If you don't wear eyeglasses like I do, you want these eye cups to be up and locked in the uppermost position. If you wear eyeglasses, then you need to twist them down. And in the world of optics and binoculars, if you want to buy a pair, if you wear eyeglasses, you're going to look for a pair of binoculars that has what they call the greatest eye relief. That really has a larger distance here, because your eyeglasses are keeping your eyes away from the lens. So eye relief is really important if you wear eyeglasses and you're shopping for a pair of binoculars. So let's say you've either got the eye cup in the upper position or the lower position. And now you need to determine, are you right eye dominant or left eye dominant? And that's real simple. If you make a triangle with your fingers and look at an object through the triangle, okay? So keep your arms locked, keep that triangle locked. Close your left eye, keep looking through the triangle, and then switch and close your right eye. Okay, when I close my right eye, because I'm right eye dominant, whatever I was looking at leaves the triangle. Okay, if you're left eye dominant, when you close your left eye, whatever you were looking at moves out of the triangle. Most people are right eye dominant. So you will notice on your binoculars that, let me see if I can bring this closer, there's an extra wheel on the right eyepiece that you can turn. And that basically can help fine tune your binoculars. So you're gonna look at something, you're gonna focus with the main focus wheel, get something really good off at a distance that's focus. Then you're gonna close your left eye and you're gonna fine tune what you're looking at with this additional wheel right here on the right eyepiece. And then once you've done that, your binoculars are set for you. Don't let anybody else borrow them. They are set for your eyes, your eyesight. So whenever you're shopping for binoculars, it's really important to test out different styles. This pair is, these are 8 by 32. 8, the first number is the magnification. So I'm able to see things 8 times farther, 8 times farther away. They're 8 times bigger. That's the magnification. And the second number, the 32, is the size in millimeters of this lens, this piece of glass right here. And the larger this piece of glass is, like you might have 8 by 40s or 10 by 50s, the larger this piece of glass is, the more light the binoculars can gather, typically the bigger your field of view, and sometimes it's easier to find a bird with a bigger piece of glass. But the bigger these numbers are, the more you're going to notice the shake and the vibration. So if these were 10 power, I'm going to be seeing 10 times the shake of my hand and or the vibration. And so 8 by 40, 8 by 32 is probably the most common pair of binoculars that bird watchers use. You know, they tend to be lightweight, easily portable. And then of course a spotting scope is going to allow you to see much farther away. You know, that's a single scope, like a telescope, but built for birding. Has a much greater magnification. And if you go down to the beach and take a field trip to one of our coastal sanctuaries, you know, we would set up spotting scopes and you could see birds really far away without disturbing them. But this is, you know, the tool of the trade to be able to monitor birds, watch birds without disturbing them. Does that help, Michael?
Yeah, that helps a lot. I think there was a question from Ross. He was saying, if you're left eye dominant, what should you do?
So if when you were looking through the triangle and when you closed your left eye, you know, the image moved, that means you're left eye dominant. A lot of people who are left-handed are also left eye dominant. Basically, you would have to find a pair of binoculars that caters to being left eye dominant. I'm sure they're out there. I've never seen any, but I'm sure there are. It's trickier because there's not that many people out there who are left eye dominant. It means you're special. But you would, again, I would still tweak the right side, you know, make sure that's really nice and crisp and in focus. But I'm sure they make left eye dominant binoculars. We have a great store here in town called Land, Sea, and Sky. And they are binocular specialists, microscope specialists, and they carry all kinds. So they probably have one that is for left eye dominant people. I'm sure it's out there.
There's a participant here, Marie, who was using some good critical thinking. She said, what if you turn the binoculars upside down? Will that work too?
You know, I think you guys should try that. Why not? I don't know. Would it work? I don't see why not. Marie is a genius. That might not be as comfortable, but I say go for it. I'm going to use that next time I talk about binoculars.
Thanks. Well, I think that's all the questions that we had. I can't begin to thank you so much for taking the time.
You're very welcome.
He's amazing.